I think one of the things that you learn as a leader, and this is true for everybody, is that your character is built on a set of habits that you build. And so you build for yourself a foundation by testing yourself at different points. And so for me, I was tested the first time I ever went overseas when I went to China. And then I was tested again the next year when I was 20 years old and I'm there in Bosnia. And I was tested again when I'm in Rwanda, tested again when I was working with street children in Bolivia. And at each test you have an opportunity because you're pushed beyond your limits. At each test you have an opportunity to grow. And I think if you build that habit of growing, you build that habit of getting used to dealing with fearful situations and being used to embracing the new, embracing chaos and change and challenge, that habit actually serves you well as a leader when you then have to lead people in a situation of change, chaos, challenge, and pain. When I look back and I think about the time that I spent in Bosnia where I was 19 years old and Rwanda where I was 20, in some ways those experiences were harder because I was younger and this was all new. So I was 20 years old and I was in a refugee camp in Goma, Zaire. There were 1.2 million refugees in a volcanic plain. All of these refugees who had fled from Rwanda. It's a brand new situation and it's a little bit overwhelming. Because you're 20 years old, you're trying to figure out what value you can add. You're trying to figure out your place in actually responding to this. And when I was in Rwanda, I remember, for example, visiting a church that was still full of skeletal remains. And you see something like that, and you start to ask yourself questions about what kind of world we're living in and what kind of role I'm going to play in it. And you also ask yourself questions about international relations and whether or not we should have responded to the genocide that was happening in Rwanda. And so, for me, one of the things that I found was that it was actually those early experiences in Bosnia and Rwanda which really were the most testing, the most trying. By the time I was actually a Navy SEAL, I was 26 years old when I entered the training. I was 27 by the time I came out. By the time I went to Iraq, I'd been to Afghanistan and Southeast Asia and the Horn of Africa, and I'd been in Cambodia and the Gaza Strip. And so you build these habits of experience that actually serve you well as a leader. Yeah. I think that in our lives we have a series of moments that always kind of build up and help us to shape our character. But for me, there were a couple of crucible moments. If I were going to think about my youngest self, one of those moments was when I was 16 years old, and I had a leadership instructor. He ran this program called Youth Leadership St. Louis. His name was Bruce Carl. And when I was 16 years old, Bruce Carl said to me, "We're going to go downtown to work at a homeless shelter." I said, "Okay, fine. I've done a lot of community service work as a kid. I can go down." And then he said to me, "And actually, we're going to spend the night." And as a 16-year-old kid, the idea of spending a night in a homeless shelter can actually generate some fear. But what Bruce did that was so fantastic was that he always addressed us with incredible respect. And Bruce said to us, he said, "I want you to go downtown and I want you to spend the night in this homeless shelter because it's important for you to understand how all of your neighbors are living." He said, "It's important for you to understand that because you can do something about it. And you don't have to wait till you're 26 or 36 or 46. You can do something about it right now." And I think that having Bruce push me in that way, push me to see how to connect to other people, push me to see how I could be of service, was actually really valuable. And that was certainly one of the moments that was important to me. Actually, the experience of going through BUDS, the Basic Underwater Demolition SEAL Training, certainly shaped my character. And it shaped my character in a number of different ways. One of them was that as you're going through BUDS, you are pushed to your physical, mental, and emotional limits. And they're always testing you. So, they'll send you underwater 15 feet down with another guy. You're with a face mask that's completely blacked out. You can see nothing. And you have to change all of your scuba gear from one guy to another. One of the things that you learn really fast when you're underwater and you can't see and you're depending on somebody else for air is that you care a whole lot in a situation like that about whether the other person is really good at their job, and you don't care a lot about whether you might like them. whether you're friends with them. So one of the things that actually came through as a leadership trait was that it became really important to me to assess how good people were at actually executing their jobs. And I know that I actually left the training with a much more of a leadership focus on that ability to actually execute for a particular mission. Yeah, I mean, so you certainly learn a lot of traits under fire as well, and you learn things when you're overseas. For me, the greatest percentage of transformation took place during the SEAL team training, where you learn, for example, how to deal with extraordinary pain. You learn how to deal with extraordinary hardship. So one of the things that I learned in SEAL team training was that even when you're really worried about yourself and you're in a moment of great pain and difficulty, as a leader, it can actually be easier. So my hardest moment in SEAL team training came during Hell Week. Hell Week is considered to be the hardest week of the hardest military training in the world, and over the course of Hell Week, the average class sleeps a total of 2 to 5 hours over the course of the entire week. And during that week, you're doing physical training with logs that weigh several hundred pounds. You're running the obstacle course. You're doing 2-mile ocean swims, 4-mile runs and soft swim. You're being pushed to your mental, physical, and emotional limits the whole week. And my hardest moment in Hell Week came at what should have been my easiest moment. It came, we're about 72 hours in, and for the first time, they were going to allow the class to sleep. So we did this little dip contest to see which crew was going to get to run into the tents first. My crew lost. As we ran into the tents finally to sleep, everybody else was already passed out. By this time, people were falling asleep standing on their feet. And everybody's passed out, and I laid down, and I couldn't fall asleep. And with every beat of my heart, I could feel my foot pulsing, because the last time I'd been through medical, they'd wrapped a bandage around my foot really tightly. So I got up and I took off my boot, ripped off the bandage, threw it on the ground, put the boot back on, laid back down, and I still couldn't sleep. And after a week of it being oppressively cold, now in the tent, it felt incredibly hot. There's this beam of sunlight coming down, and it's hitting my cot and the cots of a couple of the guys around me and all these bodies in the tent, and it feels hot. And then at that moment, I started to panic a little bit. And I started thinking, what's going to happen to me if I can't sleep? You only get 2 to 5 hours of sleep over the course of the entire week. What's going to happen to me if I can't? And I knew I was going a little bit crazy at the time, because the thought actually ran through my head. I actually thought to myself, well, maybe if I can't sleep, maybe they'll let me take a nap, right? So I'm starting to panic a little bit, and then I'm also starting to feel self-pity. It's not fair that my team ran into the tents last. It's not fair that the last time we went through medical, they wrapped my foot wrong. It's not fair that I got the worst con. And I started to descend into this pattern where I was being fearful, and I was worried about myself and thinking about myself. And I got up then, and I walked outside the tent. And I went over to this faucet. It was at about shoulder height, and I turned it on, and I put my head underneath and washed some water over my head. And as I turned back and I started walking back to the tents, I said to myself, I just said, it's not about me. This test is not about me. It's about my ability to lead the guys who were asleep in that tent. And as soon as I thought that, as soon as I started thinking about my crew, all of that pain and that fear and that worry left, and I was able to walk right into the tent, and I laid down and I fell asleep. And I knew then that I had passed through my hardest moment. What I realized later is that that was the only moment in all of Hell Week when I was alone. It was the only time in all of Hell Week when I had the luxury of focusing on my own pain and my own fear, and that's when I started to go down. When I was actually leading, when I had my boat crew and I had my class and I was going through Hell Week, then I was always able to think about what I had to do for other people. And actually doing that as a leader and thinking about serving others made me stronger. And so that's been a lesson that has stayed with me my whole life, and it's actually key to what we do today with The Mission Continues, where we help wounded and disabled veterans rebuild their sense of purpose through continued service to others in their community. One personal challenge was that coming back and starting a nonprofit organization was just a big risk. I had an idea that this was going to be something that was important, and I had an idea in my combat pay, which was not a lot. And, for a long time I was living on an air mattress in St. Louis trying to get this thing off the ground. And one of the challenges that you have there as a nonprofit entrepreneur is that there's no structure for you. Right? In the military, you're going to be guaranteed certain support. And you're going to be guaranteed that you're going to be given a mission. You're going to be given certain resources. As a nonprofit entrepreneur, you're starting everything from scratch. And you've got an idea, and you've got some passion, and then you're trying to scratch for a little money and resources and volunteers, and you have to build that from scratch. And it's a very different challenge to do that as an entrepreneur. I also think there were a lot of leadership lessons from the military that helped me be successful as an entrepreneur. One of those was the idea of commander's intent. One of the best things that they teach you in the military is this idea that as a leader, you need to be able to articulate your commander's intent and then hand it to your subordinates so that they can understand it and then use all of their own creativity, intelligence, energy to actually meet your intent. So as a commander, if somebody says, I need you to establish a reconnaissance outlook by 0500 tomorrow morning, get in communications with headquarters and provide me intelligence on X, I know as a commander, the minute that you leave the base, something's going to go wrong. But if you understand my intent, then you can use your own intelligence, creativity, energy in order to accomplish that mission. And so when I think as an entrepreneur, you're able to articulate that intent, and then you hire somebody, you bring in a volunteer, then what starts to happen if you've done that well, you're able to not only use your energy, you're able to bring in all of the energy and passion and intelligence and creativity of all of these people, and it can all be directed in the right way because you've been able to articulate the intent. I think that I always tried in whatever situation I was in to try and use whatever experience I had, whatever ideas I had from people around me to make things better. And whether I was the commander of a Joint Special Operations Task Unit in the Horn of Africa or running a Mark V Special Operations Craft Detachment in Southeast Asia, you're always trying to adjust and make adjustments to the guns and make adjustments to your navigation plan, make adjustments to the way that you're interacting with local people in the community in order to make things better. And so there was always that entrepreneurial spirit. Then when I actually came out of the military and you're really starting from scratch with zero, then you really feel the pressure and the leadership necessity of everything that you're going to have to do as an entrepreneur to build something from scratch. I think one of the things that you learn as a leader, and this is true for everybody, is that your character is built on a set of habits that you build. And so you build for yourself a foundation. When I look back and I think about the time that I spent in Bosnia where I was 19 years old and Rwanda where I was 20, in some ways those experiences were harder because I was younger and this was all new. So I was 20 years old and I was in a refugee camp in Goma, Zaire. There were 1.2 million refugees in a volcanic plain, all of these refugees who had fled from Rwanda. It's a brand new situation and it's a little bit overwhelming. Because you're 20 years old, you're trying to figure out what value you can add. You're trying to figure out your place in actually responding to this. And when I was in Rwanda, I remember, for example, visiting a church that was still full, have an opportunity to grow. And I think if you build that habit of growing, you build that habit of getting used to dealing with fearful situations and being used to embracing the new, embracing chaos and change and challenge, that habit actually serves you well as a leader when you then have to lead people in a situation of change, chaos, challenge, and pain. Foundation by testing yourself at different points. And so for me, I was tested the first time I ever went overseas when I went to China. And then I was tested again the next year when I was 20 years old and I'm there in Bosnia. And I was tested again when I'm in Rwanda, tested again when I was working with street children in Bolivia. And at each test you have an opportunity because you're pushed beyond your limits. At each test you